I feel that photography is definitely an art. Through our eyes and with our wonderfully creative minds, we can look at the landscape and visualize an image. Then, with the fantastic tool that is our camera, we can realize that vision. With our cameras, we can adjust the aperture to control which parts of the scene in front of us are in focus, and we can adjust the shutter speed to control how we want any motion in the scene to appear in the final image. We can also use items such as a polarizer or an ND filter to help us realize our vision. There are so many creative features at our fingertips. When you are new to photography, or landscape photography as I'm specifically talking about in this video, you'll be keen to soak up all the information that you can get. You may watch videos, maybe for some of you it will be this one. You will read books, you'll read articles, you'll listen to opinions and all that type of thing. The vast majority of the information you digest will be helpful and well meant. But in my experience, there are 3 pieces of advice for landscape photography which seem to come up over and over again. I'm tempted to call these rules as their importance is stressed so often they can seem to be like rules. These 3 pieces of advice are good advice, but I think if you misinterpret their importance and treat them as rules, it can strip you of a lot of your creativity in landscape photography. I think the quality of your photographs can suffer, and also your actual enjoyment. In this video I'm going to discuss these 3 rules, then show you some images I've recently captured in which I completely ignored all of these rules, and try and give you some advice and some ideas for more creative things to focus on in your landscape photography. So let's start with the most common of these, the famous rule of thirds. There are many guides or techniques that can be used for assisting with composition, but this one comes up more than any other, and when you're learning landscape photography, this is most likely the first thing you'll hear of. As you'll probably know, it's about dividing your image up into thirds, both horizontally and vertically. The theory is that if you place key parts of your image along the lines or on the actual intersection points, this will help make the image look good in our minds. You can use it to draw attention to a specific part of your image. It can be used to help with balance. It can assist you with where you position the horizon in an image and so on. I do use this guide, it's definitely good advice, and it is the perfect way to compose some scenes. But the problem is that it's easy for some of us to become too dependent on this guide, and its name even suggests it's a rule, which makes it seem even more important. I know some people who are constantly looking for scenes when they're out doing landscape photography which work with the rule of thirds. They walk past great compositions and beautiful scenes just because they are so attached to this rule they can't visualize creating images in any other way. Too much use of the rule of thirds really detracts from our creativity in landscape photography and can result in making all our images look very similar. So definitely use it, but also consider not always thinking about it to free up your creativity. The next rule or piece of advice that I hear talked about a lot in landscape photography is the importance of getting images sharp from front to back, or pin sharp from front to back as many people describe it. I absolutely agree this is great advice for many landscape images. In fact, maybe for most of your landscape images, especially if you like to take wide vista shots. However, if you feel you must do this all the time, or you try to do it all the time, then you probably aren't being as creative as you could be, and perhaps some of your images may well work better if they are not completely sharp from front to back. Making part of an image out of focus can help create an interesting look, and it can also draw the viewer's attention to a specific part of your image. You can obviously vary how much out of focus an image is and what is out of focus to achieve different looks. Again, this allows us to be very creative in our landscape photography. It helps us create some images with variety and keeps photography fun and enjoyable, and surely that's what it's all about. So on to the last rule, rule number 3. You need to shoot in the golden hour and at sunrise and sunset to get the best light and therefore the best images in landscape photography. Again, this is good advice to a degree, and it can lead to wonderful images for sure, but its importance is perhaps overemphasized in landscape photography. I love shooting at these times and I definitely encourage it, but if we only took photographs at these times, then our collection of images would lack variety, and personally I would certainly feel unfulfilled in my landscape photography. The harsh light of midday in summer can certainly be tough to work with, but generally speaking there isn't a bad light for photography, but rather there can be bad subjects for the light you are given on a specific day. I really believe in heading out to take images in a variety of different weather and lighting conditions. This is the best way to learn, and you really can get some beautiful images that you'll be proud of throughout the day. It also helps you learn and understand what you feel are the best lighting conditions for different subjects and different types of landscapes. You can still get beautiful, dramatic, moody lighting throughout the day. We don't always need the golden light or sunrise and sunset colours to create a wonderful image. Also, I think this is one piece of advice which can really affect people's enjoyment of landscape photography. Not everyone has the time, and not everyone finds it easy to get up really early or stay out late to catch the often spoken about magical light and colours. To some, the effort of getting up early can become a real chore and off-putting. If you can, then yes, I definitely encourage you to experience that light and photograph in it when you can. It really can be wonderful and lead to wonderful images. But don't feel bad if you can't. Often you will still be able to take fantastic images at other times of the day. So now that I've discussed these three rules, or these three pieces of advice that we hear a lot in landscape photography, I'd like to show you a few images that I captured yesterday specifically for this video. I completely ignored the rule of thirds for each image. None of the images are sharp from front to back. And I definitely wasn't out in the golden hour or at a time when the sky was full of wonderful colours. Nor did I go anywhere special, I just went out for a couple of hours in the countryside. Hopefully by showing you these images and talking about some different ideas regarding composition and visualisation, I can give people learning landscape photography a few pointers towards ignoring the rules and being more creative. So let's have a look at these 5 images I captured the other day as I spent a couple of hours walking through the countryside. I'm going to talk about how I tried to be creative and hopefully give you some ideas to incorporate into your own photography. None of these images, as I spoke about earlier, are sharp from front to back. I tried to use a little bit of softness in the images creatively. None are obviously captured in golden hour, sunrise or sunset. And none were composed with the rule of thirds in mind. That couldn't have been further from my mind as I composed these images. So looking at this image in front of us now, I really like this one. We've got this really nice pathway that leads off into the distance. And in terms of rule of thirds, I don't think any of the lines or intersection points really fall on anything significant in this image. Perhaps the bottom left intersection point of rule of thirds may be somewhere on the pathway, but that's totally irrelevant. I compose all my images while looking through the viewfinder. Now my viewfinder does have some faint lines on it to aid with composition, but I personally find them extremely easy to ignore. And that's a fantastic way for me to ignore the rule of thirds. I like to compose the images just looking through the viewfinder. So what I like about this image is obviously the curve of the pathway as it leads you off to that little bit of mystery at the end of the pathway there. There's a little bit of light and there's actually a little bit of mist, so I quite like that touch in this image. We've also got the trees which lean over the pathway, and even the ones to the right of the image. I like how the branches come out diagonally from them. So there's a lot of pleasing lines and curves in this image, and that's something I'm always on the lookout for. I like the ferns as well, just as they come into the image diagonally from the bottom right. Now in terms of sharpness, I deliberately capture this image so that the far away points would start to soften. So the image is really sharp at the beginning, and it's sharp probably all the way up until about 2/3 of the way into the image. Then the last third, as it leads off into the distance up that pathway, is slightly soft, and that just gives me the look that I was after. I really like that. It adds a little bit of mystery and atmosphere to the image, and it just gives it overall a nice pleasing look. So moving on to the second image that I captured on this day, and you can see at this point I was able to capture a little bit of the mist, which creates some lovely atmosphere, but unfortunately that didn't last long. Again, this image here was composed by looking through my viewfinder, and my camera takes images in a 3:2 format, so I've used the full width of my image, but I knew when composing it that I didn't want to include all of the sky. Because the sky was so grey with the mist, I just felt there would be too much of that at the top of the image. So I always knew when I come home I was going to simply remove part of the sky and crop the image, but still use the full width of the image. So what I had in mind for this one again was using some nice diagonals. So I positioned myself where I could capture the image, so the fence line leads in from the bottom right of the image. We've got the trees which lead in from there, and then just at the base of the trees or halfway up the trees you may see another fence that comes in from the right. So we've got this sort of triangle that comes in. Then there's some subtle lines throughout the field which lead off into the distance, and there was almost like an archway type of shape to the trees that are off in the distance, and I just composed my image so the fence and the trees and those subtle lines would lead your eye off there. Now that archway isn't really positioned on a rule of third. It may be close to it, but it wasn't positioned there deliberately. This for me was all about the mist, it was about the trees. I wanted to position the clump of trees and tuck them down into the bottom right of the image, as much down into the bottom right as I could. And I think now that I've cropped it, perhaps the tree line is along the top horizontal rule of third line, but that's completely by accident. The image was not composed in terms of rule of thirds. It couldn't have been further from my mind, same as it was for the previous image that I showed you. But I really like this one, and the mist gave a little bit of softness to the background in this image, which I really like. But I also used an aperture, I think it may have been f5.6, so I got the trees sharp but the background is subtly soft. It's not so soft you can't see what's going on there, but it's just got a little bit of softness to it. And I just really like the effect of that, how it adds to the atmosphere, and I think the composition works really nicely as well. So as I walked along, I was initially drawn to this scene because I spotted some bluebells amongst the grass, and it took quite a lot of work to get this composition. I had the camera down very low to the ground, but I'm really pleased with the result. So what I saw here when I looked at this scene was the opportunity to use a frame in this image. So the tree at the right, and then its branches, and then the gorse at the left, and the bluebells and the grass at the bottom provide a wonderful frame for you to look through. And off in the distance I've positioned what is a fallen down silver birch. I like how the angle of that silver birch mirrors some of the angles of the tree branches to the right. And my intention for this image was to frame that fallen silver birch with the subjects that I've talked about, which are in my foreground, but make only the frame be really sharp in this image. So the very front of the image is slightly soft, then you've got the frame which is sharp, and then the distance is out of focus as well. And I think it really makes some of the bluebells at the bottom and the rest of the frame with the tree and its leaves and so on, it makes that pop in the image. And then you've got a little bit of mystery in the background and a little bit of softness at the front of the image as well, just for artistic creative effect. So I really like this. Again, nothing was framed with rule of thirds in mind. I simply looked through my viewfinder, got the composition pleasing to my eye, set everything up the way I wanted and took the shot. The aperture for this one was f3.5, so an extremely shallow depth of field, and I think it produces a very pleasing result. So this is the next image that I captured on this particular day, and to be honest, I didn't spend very long on this one at all because I didn't feel that, at least on that particular day, it had great potential to make a fantastic image. I snapped it very quickly handheld just because I thought it was a good example of being creative and could help illustrate a few creative ideas. So obviously in this image we've got those two nice trees off in the distance, and their lighter colour stands out against the darker backdrop. And then I've used creative depth of field, quite a shallow depth of field, to make the start of the hedge line out of focus, and then as your eye follows that hedge line it comes into focus, and the hedge line and the trees to the right of the image all lead your eye across to those two trees in the distance. So it's just an example of being creative. Again, it's not sharp from front to back. I think the image would be worse if this one was sharp from front to back. But it's just an idea of being creative. And again, I don't think anything in this image falls particularly directly on any of the rule of thirds lines or intersection points. Again, snapped very quickly, handheld, looking through the viewfinder, just trying to be creative and using depth of field to give a nice effect. So on to the final image that I captured on this particular day, and I really like this one. I was initially drawn to the spring leaves, which were just being highlighted by the diffuse sunlight from above. Then as I began to look more at this tree, I really liked the tree root type area, which was covered in moss, and also the branch that came out, and I noticed the potential to frame a tree which was very far off in the distance in the branches of this tree. So I spent some time looking around the composition, got that set up, and then the more I looked, I saw the curve of the branch coming out of the tree in the foreground leads you directly off to that tree, and then on that tree itself in the distance there's a nice curve which just comes up. So it's just like a long continuation of the curve which starts in the tree in the foreground, leads you out to that tree in the distance, and then the curve of that tree leads your eye up to the nice spring leaves as well. So I really like it. There's some pleasing lines in this image. Again, it is far from being sharp from front to back. I wanted the tree in the foreground sharp and the most of the leaves, and then I wanted the focus to soften as you lead off into the image. The light was hitting the tree in the distance, that gives it a nice atmospheric look, and the fact that it's out of focus works perfectly for me as well. Now again, I didn't use rule of thirds for this image. The tree in the distance I don't think falls on any of the intersection points, and I think the tree in the foreground almost looks like it could be on a third, but I think it's slightly to the left of that. And the image was simply composed by looking through my viewfinder, framing that tree off in the distance. As I talked about before, framing is a very nice technique to use, as is looking for leading lines, and they don't always have to be straight. Curved lines work really nice and create pleasing shapes to your eye as well. So hopefully you've enjoyed watching this video and maybe picked up a few creative ideas that you can incorporate into your own landscape photography. If you're new in learning, certainly use the rule of thirds. I use it a lot myself, as does probably every photographer in the world. Certainly go out in golden hour, sunrise or sunset, and certainly work on getting your images sharp from front to back where appropriate. But don't treat these as rules. Free yourself up, be creative, and I'm sure you'll capture some wonderful images that you're really proud of. Thanks so much for watching. If you have enjoyed it, a like rating is always appreciated, and if you haven't subscribed and would like to see more videos from myself, then feel free to subscribe to my channel. But for now, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.